I want to start actually by just thanking Australian revolutionaries, Australian left, Australian solidarity movement for the Palestinians. It's been very inspiring watching the closing of the ports. It's been an important thing. And what I think everyone should remember when you're facing down the cops outside these ports and closing down streets and so on is that every time you do this, you are being watched by 200 million Arabs. It's all being beamed into Arab homes. This is inspiring. And we begin to see the way in which our global movement is beginning to shift and shake the world powers, shift and shake imperialism, and step up, I think, to the events that are taking place inside of Palestine, inside of Gaza, inside of Lebanon, Syria. Last night they bombed the West Bank, the whole of Egypt. This sense, I think, that what we are witnessing is probably the most horrific thing, I think, in world history. I was reminded the other day that as the death toll for Palestinians, the known death toll for Palestinians reaches something like 32,000 over the last 6 months, that in 1982, the Israelis killed the same amount of people in Lebanon in 32 days. The brutality of the Israeli regime is not new, but the movement of solidarity globally is phenomenal. It's the biggest I have ever seen, and it's having a massive impact. So I want to start off by thanking you and the movement around the world for the way in which they've risen to the cause of the Palestinians. And to remember, I think, that our central slogan remains ceasefire now. We are witnessing, try and find the right words for it. We are witnessing in North Gaza the beginning of the Palestinian Holocaust, the starvation of 1.1 million people in worldview, in full view, recorded by the Israeli soldiers themselves and by others. We are witnessing horrors live streamed in a way we have never before. When news of the Sabra and Shatila massacre came out in Lebanon in 1982, the slaughter of unarmed Palestinians by Israel and its allies, it took 2 to 3 days before journalists could get in to find out the scale and the scope of the massacre. We are seeing it every day. And it is a testament, I think, to the strength and solidarity of the Palestinians that they have managed to resist so far, and a testament, I think, to the international movement. So I want to start off by saying that. I want to say something else. Israel is losing this war. And Israel is losing this war by the sheer scale and brutality they are unleashing on the Palestinian people. I have no doubt Netanyahu and his war cabinet on the 8th of October thought that they would be able to drive the Palestinians into Egypt, that they'd be able to de-arm and destroy Hamas, dismantle its infrastructure within weeks. It is really the strength, I think, of the Palestinians. They haven't been able to do this. But in so doing, the Israelis are burning the furniture in order to carry out this second Nakba, this second clearance of the Palestinians. And this fire that they started is now beginning to spread across the world. I read today how the Americans are now saying how Israel is a strategic liability inside the world, how Israel has now become isolated, and heartened to find out that a few months ago in France, if you came out in support of the Palestinians, you got beaten with batons. A couple of days ago, the French authorities have been forced to take up, don't say they will, but to take up the prosecution of any French citizen who went to Gaza and who was involved in this genocide. The same thing is happening inside of Holland. The same thing is happening here in Britain, where 20,000 Brits went over to join this genocide of the Palestinians. And now the consequences are coming back to them. This is a testament of the movement. Netanyahu is facing defeat on a strategic level. This is, I think, quite clear. They have failed to push the Palestinians out. They have failed to intimidate Lebanon. They have drawn Yemen into a war. They have shaken really the American control over the Middle East. And this split inside the world supporters of Israel is now reflected inside the Israeli war cabinet itself. When you have one of the key ministers in the war cabinet go to visit without permission Western capitals, and then the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu instructing his embassies around the world, around the tour, around the US and Europe as well, to not give any assistance to one of his ministers in this mission, tells you and shows you the depth now of the crisis inside of Israel. But this crisis is really nothing compared to the crisis that is now beginning to develop inside the frontline states. I think really early on in this movement, I specifically was heard, but I know lots of Arabs were as well, absolutely inspired by the first protests that were organized by American Jews when they closed down Chicago. I think it was Chicago Central Station, New York Central Station, very quickly afterwards. Very, very early in this movement, it was the Jews in Britain and also in the US who took the initiative to take our movement forward. It has been incredible depth of this movement inside of Britain that I think is really, really inspiring. In the Arab world, now this is beginning to create a pressure cooker. Early on, we saw some of the biggest demonstrations inside of Jordanian history since 1969, since I was 5 or 6 years old. These demonstrations growing in strength, growing in breadth, growing in depth to the last 5 days where really the capital Amman has been shaken by a whole series of mass demonstrations in a way we have never seen before. And you listen to the slogans in the streets, and this is the important thing. What started off as slogans of general solidarity with the Palestinians has now become specific demands on the Jordanian regime. Open the borders, they're chanting, let us through. Open the borders means declare war on Israel. The pressure of tens of thousands of people coming to the streets, trying to close down, trying to torch the Israeli embassy, means that the Jordanian regime, one of the most pro-Western, one of the most stable of the frontline states, is now teetering on the edge. We don't know where this movement's going to go, but we haven't seen a movement like this before. And a few days ago, the Jordanian chants on the streets were directed specifically at the Egyptians, even using the Egyptian dialect to say, here is Jordan, we're on the street, where are you? When, Fain, Masri, Fain, where are the Egyptians? And then a demonstration organized by who? By our comrades, Mahinura Masri, the revolutionary socialists, the ones who've just come out of prison, on the steps of the Journalists Institute, chanting, answering the Jordanian demonstrators and going directly for the Sisi regime, for the pro-Western military regime inside of Egypt. This movement now beginning to rumble and reach depths, I think, that we still don't know where it's going to lead. I heard a story which really broke my heart about Egyptian soldiers who are mainly conscripts on the southern border of Rafah, separated by starving Palestinians, but mainly Palestinian children, by a thick fence, but one they can see through, and the Palestinian children running up the fence, shouting, "Uncle, uncle, please throw me a biscuit." And the Egyptian soldiers breaking down in tears, the feeling impotence, feeling that they're watching Palestinians starve in front of their eyes and they can't even throw them a biscuit. What was the reaction of the Egyptian regime to this image of crying Egyptian soldiers? Was to build a brick wall between the Egyptian soldiers and the Palestinian children so that the Egyptians didn't have to watch. They can hear the cries of the Palestinians, but they didn't have to watch the starving of the Palestinian children. The anger inside of Egypt, the anger inside of Jordan is really something quite phenomenal, something quite amazing. But they remain trapped within quite strong, strict, and authoritarian regimes. The international movement has meant that it has given them strength, has given them inspiration to move forward, to take the struggle forward. Early on in this war, when Yemen closed the Red Sea to Israeli and more and more Western shipping, the Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates stepped up and said, we will open a land route from our ports on the Arabian Gulf, a land route to Israel, to ensure that Israel continues to function. this word went round, and Jordanians began to not storm the roads, but began to try and block the roads to ensure there were no trucks that would go that would break the siege of Israel, that would feed the Israelis as they continue to starve and commit genocide against the Palestinians. And very soon afterwards, statement from the Jordanian government going, this plan was never going to happen. This was just these were just things people were saying. We have no, in essence, saying we are retreating. We are closing this route even before it opens because of the strength of the movement, and the strength of the movement that really knows no boundaries. The US is in strategic chaos. Around this time last year, China stepped in, invited the foreign minister of Iran and the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, two regimes that were facing off close to war, took them to Beijing and told them that they had to warm relations, if you like. They had to de-escalate the tensions inside of the Gulf, because China relies on now both Saudi oil and on Iranian oil. The thing about this movement, the thing about this meeting, was the Americans had no clue it was taking place. It was done almost behind their backs. And as soon as the agreement was announced, that's when the Americans discovered that they had been sidelined by the Chinese. The Israeli attack on Gaza has meant now that American troops are being forced to leave their last base inside Iraq. So the whole, if you like, the retreat of US imperialism is being made even into a deeper crisis by the Israeli failure inside of Gaza. We have to remember in 2001, after 9/11, how the Americans were not only in Afghanistan, but 2 years later in Iraq, and talking seriously about the invasion of Syria. 20 years later, $1 trillion later, 1 million people dead later, America has had to retreat from Afghanistan, has had to retreat from Iraq. So it's setting up a new base. It is now building the second biggest embassy in the world, the second biggest American embassy in the world, is now being built on the hills above Beirut. They are redrawing the line, if you like, of this conflict, moving it to the Eastern Mediterranean after retreating from Iraq and retreating from Afghanistan. This means that the scale and the bet, I think, that the Americans have put on side of Israel, on Israel winning a quick ground war inside of Gaza, has now turned into bust. It is, I think, it is a testimony again to the Palestinians, testimony also to the Lebanese. I myself am from Beirut. I have lost count of the wars, but I was 5 in 1967. I was 10 in 1973 war. Remember that very well. The first invasion of Lebanon, 1978. The second invasion of Lebanon, 1982. There's huge numbers of deaths, huge numbers of destruction that they poured on us. The occupation of Lebanon, the southern part of Lebanon, that went on till 2000. The collapse of the Israeli occupation in 2000, and then the return of the Israelis in 2006 with their 33-day war, which they lost, by the way, against the Lebanese resistance. This war puts all the others in the shade in terms of its ferocity, its brutality, and its desperation. And when Bibi Netanyahu was challenged on the aims of the Israeli war, he said, "You cannot judge this war until a century in the future." That means he has focused totally on Israel winning, completing the Nakba, the subjugation of the Palestinians, the expulsion of the Palestinians, but also at the same time now looking north towards subjugation of the Lebanese. You see how this war now is becoming more and more dangerous. So the call for ceasefire remains the central call, I think, for our movement, not only to stop the tragedy that is taking place for Palestinian people, but also so that this war does not run deeper into the froth of blood and mud. So it's for this reason that our movement has to stay on the streets. It's for this reason that the pressure we are putting on the politicians, on the supporters of this genocide has to be sharp and hard and constant. And you see now the Democrats in the US, they cannot even have a town council meeting without there being pro-Palestinian demonstrators. They cannot escape the consequences of this of this genocide. But there is also something deeper taking place, and one really that I think affects Europe, but also will affect places like Australia and others in North America, which is this Nakba that is taking place, this catastrophe that they're unleashing on the Palestinians, is something European countries would like to copy. They would like, you saw just at the beginning of this war, the German Spiegel, their Spiegel magazine, one of the main magazines, running an article talking about the need to cleanse Germany of foreigners. Who are these foreigners? The Turks and so on. That the French government puts forward is in danger now of falling to the fascist far right, that they want their own Nakba to turn then against the North African immigrants, the North African communities inside of France. We get this also in Britain, but they're not as strong in Britain. The left here, revolutionary left here, is stronger and able to hold them back. But they would like the same thing. I was as soon as the Armenians were driven recently out of their homes in northern Armenia, it took me back to the first Armenian genocide in 1915, and the reaction of the genocide against the Armenians by the Ottoman Turks, of then the rising fascist movement in Germany. If the Turks can get away with it, then we can get away with it doing to the Jews. This is how they thought. And now, if they can get away with what they're doing in Palestine, then this will be the beginning for them to be able to cleanse, as in their own words, Europe and so on. So this is not simply about the Palestinians, central and important as that is. This is part of a greater struggle against the forces of darkness, if you like, with the rise of the far right, with the polycrisis that's now taking place everywhere. So we have, if you like, the situation in which we have a retreating US imperialism, a rising Chinese imperialism, massive instability, the polycrisis, as we call it, the multiple crises that are taking place inside of the world, the climate crisis that we are feeling, that we feel constantly and becoming more and more pressing, economic crisis, the pressure on wages that we're feeling, the pressure on work, the pressure on rent, all these things, all these crises are now beginning to come together and frothing that. And for that, the need now for the revolutionaries to organize themselves into a higher level, into a level of a party, becomes more and more important. The intervention, if you like, of revolutionaries inside of this is becoming more and more central. It is amazing, I think, for us here in England, especially my branch in Hackney of Socialist Worker, is that we have tripled in size over the last few months. When we normally would sell 20 papers or 25 papers on a rainy Saturday, now 120, 200 papers on a regular basis. There is a massive growth of revolutionary thought, revolutionary consciousness, that for a whole generation Palestine, they have seen a whole series of institutions collapse before their eyes. I work in a pub, right? I'm a chef. I have lots of other, I'm the head chef. I have lots of other people I normally like shout at and so on. I came into work on the day of the International Court of Justice decision on whether Israel was committing genocide, to find not only my chefs, but also people from the front of house, from the staff in the kitchen, listening to the court case. And at the end of it, when the court came out so heavily against Israel, turning to me and saying, this is now all over. The court has decided. As soon as the court decides, then this means that the Israelis have to stop. And then a few days later, all swearing and cursing the international system If we break a law, they were saying, if we break a law and go up in front of court, if we refuse to do what the court says, we go to jail. Here we have the worst crime possible in international law, in world history. They're told to stop and they don't stop. They're told to allow food in and they don't allow food in. You see all these ideas changing, I think, inside of this generation. The door is opening
20 minutes
for revolutionary left. Yeah, the doors are opening for the revolutionary left, and we actually have to kick them in. I think this is what we have to do. This point in history, which has brought together both the complete horrors of the world, but also I think the hope that comes with it. Someone asked me the other day, when we say from the river to the sea, what will Palestine look like? What exactly will it look like? And I say, just go on any pro-Palestinian demonstration, and that's what Palestine will look like. The masses of people who come together, the Jewish sections that come and have been leading it, the way in which everyone has been welcomed in it, the way in which, despite repeated efforts for provocation by the far right and so on, the discipline of these demonstrations has been really tremendous. So it is, I think, a testimony to our movement and a testimony to the movement around the world. But it still remains central to us to go to call for a ceasefire and ensure that there's a just ceasefire taking place. I think, I don't think I've ever in my life seen the scale of a movement like this, the depth of the movement like this, that we can even talk about it at a molecular level. We have a small theater, independent picture house here in my neighborhood, which is usually set up for the Eurovision Song Contest. I don't know if you guys have to watch these things, but we usually pumped on our tellies. And the big London party for the Eurovision Song Contest takes place and has always taken place at this cinema. It was down the list of what we wanted to do. Someone in one of our Palestinian solidarity meetings suggested we write a couple of emails. Maybe they'll cancel it. They wrote a couple of emails very soon afterwards. It came back, the decision came back. Not only are we canceling the Eurovision Song Contest and this party because Israel's participation is in it, but we're going to hold an alternative event for money for medical aid for Palestine. And you think, we didn't have to push. We didn't have to argue. This is actually the mood generally that is on the ground. When there was an attempt by Zionists to book the Apollo Theatre in central London, a big theatre in central London, we called a demonstration. And as we were about to go to the demonstration, word went out that it was cancelled. And we all thought, we just need to threaten a demonstration and they will cancel. But actually what turned out was the workers in the Apollo Theatre went on strike. They refused to hold and host this event, and it shows you actually the depth of this movement and the levels of solidarity. I have a few more minutes, and I just want to finish with this. I was talking to an Egyptian friend who was in London briefly, and I said to him, "Where is Egypt? What is happening in Egypt?" And he said to me this. I got on a train from Cairo, which is the capital, to Alexandria, which is the second biggest city on the Mediterranean coast, and it goes through the heart of Egypt, through the cotton fields and the cotton factories and the rural industries. And he said almost every village we passed on the train had a mural painted for Palestine and had a mural for Abu Ubaidah, who is the de facto leader of Hamas's military wing. Everywhere you look, he says, you see Palestine. Everywhere, every conversation you hear is about Palestine. Egypt is bubbling, it is boiling, it is a pressure cooker. And it is, I think, this that is going to be the key. With Jordan now heading into what I can only imagine to be now a revolutionary crisis for the government, Egypt, I think, is very closely behind. It's testimony to our movement, but also that the real solution to this lies precisely in Jordan and in Egypt, with these movements breaking the hold of Western imperials' control over their countries. The Israelis are throwing everything into this. They are burning every bridge. They are destroying all their reputations. They are throwing everything into this, and they are losing. But we have to keep on the streets until we get a ceasefire. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.